Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Careers Sitrep. Welcome. Happy Friday to everybody on this Friday afternoon, 26th of November. Great you come to join us for this Careers Sitrep. This is our regular slot, which you do on Friday afternoons, covering certain sectors, industry sectors, etc., particularly those which are pretty good for getting service leavers and veterans into them. So it's been an interesting period since the last Sitrep, hasn't it? Where the economy is going and vacancies, numbers of jobs actually rising. Some weeks back, we were very worried about the end of the furlough scheme and expecting some higher levels of unemployment across the UK. That so far has not happened. So it's actually a bit of a job seekers market. But some sectors, as we know, under COVID have actually done pretty well. Some have really suffered badly. But one which is doing very, very well indeed, as part of the whole blue light, the emergency services, is the fire and rescue services. Okay, a huge track record of giving tremendous jobs and roles for those veterans and service leavers, particularly tapping into the experiences that we've gone through in our service in the armed forces. So I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome you all to this special section all about the fire and rescue services and careers for veterans. So this is our routine slot, and it's not just about me. I'm not doing it on my own. I'm delighted to be joined by a real team of experts today, ladies and gentlemen. So first, I'd like to welcome JP Helliwell. JP Helliwell, who is a serving Army reservist, which is fantastic. Spent many years in the fire and rescue services. Now the station manager in Greater Manchester, in Greater Manchester for the fire and rescue service there, as well as also the Armed Forces Covenant lead in that area. So very warm welcome to you, JP. Great to see in an area which I know very well, and that will come up later on. And secondly, delighted also to welcome Shay Scott. Welcome, Shay, ex-Royal Air Force for about 12 years or so, had some tremendous service and then moved over to the Fire and Rescue Services. Now in Berkshire, also a station manager for dealing with skills and training, etc. in Reading in the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service. Great to see you, Shay, and look forward to hearing what you've got to say. And thirdly, Kate Hughes. Down in the southwest in Plymouth, ex-Royal Navy, I think 12 years in the Royal Navy, tremendous service there, and then joined RFEA, the Forced Employment Charity, as our ex-forces lead to support all veterans into employment in the southwest in Plymouth. And again, with lots of experience of both firefighting and employment. So welcome to you all. I'm Alistair Halliday. I'm Chief Executive of RFEA, the Forced Employment Charity, as I say. And this is going out live this afternoon from 14:30, as you know, 3 bits onto Facebook, onto LinkedIn, and also into, yes, it's going out. And yes, there's a third one. Oh my gosh. I'll remember in a second. But actually, it gives you, ladies and gentlemen, the opportunity to come in on any question that we say. Any point that you wish to ask us, please do either enter it into the box on all of those fora, and you'll see that we'll be able to answer them, and then it will help to shape the conversation. It's just got a bit dark outside. We're in the middle of a storm, but I'm sure the light's going to change in a second. But it's great that you've come to join in this afternoon. So without further ado, let's kick off the conversation. And we've all served. And we've all gone various stages, have gone into other walks of life, etc. So the first thing I really want to discuss is what are our own personal experiences, and perhaps starting with Shay. Just think about our own. You went from the Royal Air Force into the job you are now. Just talk us through a bit of your own transition, how you prepared for it. Did it go okay? Anything you would do? Any sort of tips or whatever which came out of that? What would you think?
Okay, firstly, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here, first time here. So my transferable skills, I imagine, for my time with the Armed Forces and how they helped me get prepared for a career with the Fire and Rescue Service. It's a multitude of skills that you probably don't realise you're amassing as you go through your career in the Armed Forces. Things like timekeeping, discipline, how you organise yourself, how you work as a team. Very much the team ethos in the Fire and Rescue Service really does pay out from your time in the Armed Forces. That camaraderie and esprit de corps you have from working with people in some very stressful situations in the Armed Forces very much transfers itself directly into the fire and rescue service, because although your work will not be in maybe conflict or on operations for humanitarian aid, you will still be in situations here in the fire and rescue service whereby you will be called upon to use those skills to be able to react calmly under pressure, to think correctly, focus on your training, focus on the skills you've learned, to make you really good at your job. So there is that sort of bleed over, that natural bleed over from the armed forces into the fire and rescue service.
And how did you find that for yourself? How did you find your own sort of personal transition, Ché?
I found it really, it almost like fitting a glove as such, almost like the fact whereby it felt like it felt like being back in the armed forces to some degree. And I think I'll always say that the team ethos and the teamwork ethic of the fire and rescue service is about as close to the military as you can get, I suppose, without being in the military. So again, it does feel like you almost a little bit like you come home, and because there are a large number of, especially in Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, large number of veterans who have served and some who are still serving, it feels like you're coming home and everyone sort of has that same outlook and that positivity around serving the community.
And that's a great thing, and I'm sure we'll come back onto that about why people fit into it in more broad terms. But Kate, what was your experience when you left the Royal Navy?
I had a pretty successful transition, I have to say, and I was one of the fortunate ones that stepped into a new position and was released early. But I think some of the barriers that I faced actually came later when I was made redundant, and nobody really prepares you for that. But our resilience and our adaptability and all those skills that we have, in terms of our bearing, like Shay said, timekeeping, punctuality, they're all such key transferable skills that I think many service leavers don't recognise, and certainly continue to undersell themselves. And I think, where we come in terms of the RFEA is being able to help support them and recognise those skills, translate that into civvy speak, and give them the confidence that they need to be able to be successful in their next careers.
That's a great point, and I know we'll come back to that. And thanks, Tony Keenan, for a great question here about the CTP pathway, which we're talking about. We've all gone through this sort of period, but actually we'll come back to this, highlighting disparity across different sector and stations, and recommending our recommendations, which we'll come back onto this point in a very second. Just before we do, I'd just like to turn to JP. I know that in a way, you haven't transitioned because you haven't had to. You're still a serving reservist. So I'd be interested in your view really and about how your reservist service sort of ties in with the reservist side, but also ties in with your real job now doing the fire.
Absolutely, yeah. I sort of echo what Ché was saying before, in that it was quite a seamless transition really, and I've sort of transitioned the other way, if you like. But the attributes I had gained in the fire service initially, nearly 20 years ago, were very easily taken across to initially the infantry unit I was at, and then certainly the intelligence corps. I think there isn't any aspects of either role that doesn't transcend each role. I couldn't put a finger on one of them that you cannot somehow relate to each of the roles. So I found it quite, I wouldn't say easy, because obviously you've got the challenge of your initial training and what have you, trade training, but the actual process of going from one service into another and working hand in hand, I think works quite well, in fact, very well. That's one of the reasons why we decided to set up the Armed Forces Network within Manchester Fire Service. When I joined the reserves, there was very little knowledge of how that sort of transition would take place, how it works with the fire service. And we did have a policy, but very few people knew about it. So one of the key things from my point of view was to sort of make everyone's awareness a lot greater around that subject, alongside with the veterans that we work with within our service as well, whether it be welfare, support in any other way, and also recruitment, which I'm sure we will touch on. But yeah, the transition for me from fire service to army was fairly seamless. Thanks, Alistair.
It's brilliant thinking it the other way. It's like a seamless thing, both either way. And I think it's the nature of the work, isn't it? The amazing work in the fire and rescue services. It's so many parallels in with military service across the thing, even before people are actually specialist firefighters, etc. in the services. I think there's an interesting part. You say my own experience. I mean, I left, went straight into a big role in Raytheon And in a way, I would also say it seemed to be a seamless thing. But actually, perhaps taking Kate's point, there's a time when you need to move on, and that's when suddenly it can be, you can go through a challenging period. It's great if you stay in the same thing, but actually, as we know, a lot of service leavers go into something for a bit, and then they have to move on to something else at various stages. It's great that we can talk about that. So we might come back to more CTP things. So we've already, I suppose, introduced some of the attributes that we've been talking about in more general terms about why service leavers are good in the workplace, in the civilian workplace. Let's just explore that a bit more. I mean, Shay, you introduced this a moment ago. I mean, if you were summarising it, what would you say the real key things? If you're now as an employer looking at this great cohort of people leaving the armed forces and joining, what do you really see the benefits are?
The benefits you see in the civilian world now from people coming from the armed forces sector is that now the armed forces personnel across all three services all come out with, the most important thing I would say is they all come out with civilian recognised qualifications. Mm-hmm. So in my day, there used to be, they're all military qualifications that were only recognisable in the military. So when you came out in the civilian world, it wasn't recognised. So now there's a lot more emphasis through the CTP and with other sectors such as ours in the fire service and the emergency services, is that all of the qualifications they gain within the armed forces, the majority are all civilian recognised courses and civilian courses. So that really does support them when they're coming to the end of their time with the armed forces. When they come out, they've got those recognised qualifications to hand, rather than having to retrain all those qualifications again to gain a civilian qualification. It's a little bit more seamless and a little bit more less hassle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, completely. I mean, I think it's very true that the amount of accredited training now which happens. I mean, certainly when I joined the Navy a long time ago, there was nothing, I think, which is accredited. Then steadily built up, NVQs, level things which are recognised. In a way, it's a work in progress, isn't it? I think there is a lot more still needs to be done, but without doubt, recognising those skills and the training that people have got. But there's something around the sort of the more general, wider skills, whole life skills, etc., and leadership and management, as well as the resilience, team skills. I mean, ability, frankly, to get up in the middle of the night and be reliable and all those sort of things. And JP, I mean, you'll see that as you do in your reservist bit in the army as well, don't you? But I mean, what do you think about those other wider skills there?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking of coming at it from a slightly different angle, which I think you were alluding to, really. I would say certainly Greater Manchester, and I know each fire service nationwide will have their own set of core values. Now, I'll just give you an example of our core values. We've got professional honesty, inclusivity, respect, and excellence. Now, those of you who are still serving or have recently come out will understand how close that sort of links with certainly the Army core values. I'm not sure about the RAF and Navy, but I'm sure they have similar ones. And that is the sort of person, that sort of attitude that we are really wanting to employ. And again, that just adds to that seamless transition from armed forces into the fire service. Yes, you've got the accredited skills, which are absolutely fantastic, but it's that right person for the right job. And that is exactly what you're getting, especially when you're hitting all those core values from day one, because they've been used to living them for the past X amount of years in the armed forces.
It's tremendous there. I mean, actually, as you say, it's those values and ethos type things which people who've served. I mean, Kate, I expect you see the same thing, but from a Navy perspective, you say the same read across as well?
Of course, yeah, absolutely, Alistair. And I was just thinking back there to what JP was saying, and it does take a certain profile and demographic certain character to be able to join the forces. And you're absolutely right, JP. Those personal skills are just so relevant in terms of blue light services as well. Alistair, you just took me back to when getting up in the middle of the night to do night shifts, and you get your shake when you're on board, ready for your shift, and you have to be ready and prepared. And that's just a normal working routine. That's just the shift work, let alone when you're in charge of fire, or you have to react to a fire alarm or something as well.
I mean, I think there's something in a way about it's reliability. I mean, people have to rely in the armed forces. because crikey, in the end, it can result in, if people don't do the role properly, people can lose their lives. I mean, in the most serious instances of that, whether it's not manning tackling a fire in a ship in the correct way, or something more on the battlefield sort of area. So I suppose we're people who serve are used to trusting. People need to be professional, do their job, and it's absolutely key when people make the transition into this area when same sort of issues are. If you're I would imagine, going into a large building, a very dangerous fire, and my goodness, we've had some of those. You need to have people alongside you, you can rely on, and they're not going to do something which means that it's hazardous to the whole team. So I think in a way, perhaps this is something which is slightly more unusual because a lot of other work areas don't go into the same sort of levels of risk, perhaps, which we're talking about in this area, which people who've served are used to. So I suppose the ones I'm thinking at there, I mean, there are some great attributes which service leaders have more generally anyway for any role. But my goodness me, in this exciting area, there really are some ones which do rely on those other key things, because there'll be some very similar situations. Would you say that, Shay? I mean, in terms of,
I would definitely agree with that. It's just that we talked earlier about timekeeping, and we're not talking about just timekeeping, making sure you're on break on time. Across all three services, be it the Navy, the Army, or the Air Force, if you have to be at a certain place at a certain time to do a certain thing, you cannot be late. Otherwise, other people, other phases of operations or conflicts or whatever are going to become unstuck. So it is really, really drilled into you about the reason for you getting to that point. No matter how you get there, you will get there at that point to deliver whatever, to do whatever. And in the fire service, we start work at 0900 in the morning. If you turn up at 1 minute past 9, the engine will not wait for you. The fire engine will go out the doors without you. So you need to be there, And at 2 a.m, when you're woken from your bed, all the lights going on and bells and whistles going off, you have to get focused really quick and become professional very, very quick, because you could be turning out to something along the lines of the Grenfell disaster. Turn at 12:30 to 1 in the morning, you turning out to your career-defining incident where you have to be on your game right there, right then. So that all that sort of stuff does sort of play across as part of that transitional process into the fire service or any emergency services from your armed forces career.
I'm sure. I mean, that will resonate with everybody who served. That sort of feeling. Yeah, my gosh, something. But yeah, we've woken up in the middle of the night when you suddenly you've got to deliver very quickly and actually be absolutely spot on. I mean, do you think, Kate? Sometimes you think. It's an interesting point. How many people, when they are leaving, are they aware of the skills, do you think? Do we have an issue that people, when we're serving, we don't really understand what is going to work well in the civilian workplace? Is there something more we can do to help that, would you think?
I absolutely, definitely agree with that. I think, we were saying earlier about people not recognising their skills and underselling themselves is a big issue for service leavers, because when you actually drill down into it, like Shay was saying there, being able to wake up, being able to switch on straight away, having the mutual respect for your peers, that those are not things that become apparent very quickly to civilian workforces. That's inbred from the military and from all the service training that we've had across, whether it's the RAF, Army, or the Navy and the Marines. That's indoctored into us, and it's the way we are. So the facts as well that Shay was saying earlier about being able to give, it's not just about those fast reaction situations like the fires and floods. It's actually about the awareness piece as well now, and the education piece. So many of us have done instructions and delivered briefings, and it's those skills as well. But we just take all of that for granted.
Yeah, I think it's a key thing, and I think there's something about when people serve. There's something about being very much part of the team and not thinking about themselves as individuals. And I think we've perhaps all been through that. So thinking about what attributes is quite anathema for many people leaving, and make the transition to be talking about what you can do. I mean, JP, in your experience now with it in the reserves, do you see this sort of read across? And I suppose in a way you're going the other way when you're going from the fire service back into the army. Do you see this sort of a lack of understanding of what both sides bring to each other?
Not as much from the fire service to the army side.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say so there as much, Alistair. But going from the other side, I've seen it sort of first hand, really, especially from a recruitment point of view. We've had many people come to an interview phase. So they've passed all the physical tests and the fitness tests, and they come to an interview stage. And we know full well from an armed forces background, and we're expecting them to come out with these great examples that they can say to what we call Green Book staff, which is a civilian strand of the fire service, if you like, non-uniformed, and the ability to be self-aware in the fact that they need to sell themselves rather than play down what they've done is quite apparent. I think that's something that really needs working on, whether it's from our point of view to people who are transitioning, or whether it's internally from the armed forces for people leaving. It's the ability to realise what they have done, because they all have at some point shown leadership, teamwork, inclusivity. They've shown all that at various points, whether it's in training or on ops, and that would be perfect examples for getting them through to the assessment centre, the interview phase, and getting them into the role itself. And sometimes that's where they fall short of being able to speak about themselves rather than we did this. And I think that's what we need to change a little bit, hopefully, starting from now.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, isn't it? It's about something about making sure people have got the confidence and knowing what they've done as they served, as they bring that through when it comes to an interview, and doing experiences which many people have not experienced anything like that, and having the confidence to do that. There's a great question here from Scott. Oh, interesting. I tried to get in the fire brigade when I left London, Berkshire. I passed everything I needed to do was the Tom and actually recruiting. Wow. Building trade. So that's interesting. So perhaps at that time they weren't recruiting the numbers, but it's a very interesting point. Perhaps it's the time to come into more specifically about going in opportunities. I mean, are the fire service now recruiting? To take that last question, clearly there was somebody who was keen to join, and at the time presumably they weren't recruiting the numbers. But Shay, what's the recruiting like now?
I would say the opportunities now for joining the fire service are probably one of the best times, I think, especially over the next year, maybe 2 years, for people wishing to join the fire service. For the operational side, would be absolutely this is the time to try across all services. We're recruiting. Obviously, we're a fairly small fire service compared to a Met Brigade like Greater Manchester, but you can extrapolate that across all 45 UK fire and rescue services, who are all in the same boat as us, going through quite a large recruitment drive. So I would say that now is probably one of the best times if you wanted to join the fire service. Now is a good time to try.
And JP, is that the same in Manchester? I mean, in terms of the numbers and actually, perhaps you could run through what the sort of training pipeline is for somebody leaving the armed forces who goes in, is selected, and perhaps the process, etc. Do you want to run through that?
Absolutely, yeah. The recruitment numbers are very similar to Ché, but rather on a grander scale in Greater Manchester. We started our major recruitment campaign at the start of this year, and we were looking to employ 300 new firefighter apprentices over the next 3 years. So yeah, it's the biggest one that we've had in many years. So yeah, it's a great time to come to the fire service. With regards to the actual process, I would imagine that varies slightly from service to service. So I can only really speak about my own. And again, that would vary depending what you do on the lead up to that. So if you are a complete civilian, or you've left the forces for a period of time, you would have to log on to a taster day, what we're doing at the moment. At that point, your name goes on a register to say you've attended one of these taster days, where you get to see some of the equipment, some of the tests that are involved, talk to some serving firefighters and the recruitment team. And from there, you would then you would do the application form. So if you pass the application form, you would then have to do your maths and English. You have to do your what we call NFSTs, which is the National Firefighter Selection Tests. and then you would attend an assessment centre, which is basically an interview stage. It is quite a long process, and there are quite a few stages within that. But if you are fit, if you are able to speak to serving firefighters about how or what they're looking at, especially in the assessment centre interview stage, because we work off a framework. We work currently off the NFCC, which is National Firefighter Chiefs Council, or National Fire Chiefs Council, beg your pardon. And they have a framework where we take all our questions off, for example. So if you were thinking about joining the fire service, certainly in Manchester, you would be able to look at that document, read it, absorb it, and come out working out your own examples for each specific phase of that framework. However, if you are serving, for example, we are currently involved with CTP, which I'm sure we'll talk about again, and that would be classed as your taster day. So if you are able to get on one of those CTP events, you miss out that phase, if you like, and you are then eligible for the application phase. So there are benefits as well, and as I'm sure there's pros and cons to the CTP, but that is one of the pros from our point of view.
Great, that's very interesting, JP. I mean, and I think it's interesting. It was obviously going through the selection process, how to get in, and then let's just consider the roles themselves. I mean, many people, I'm sure, listening or watching will think it's all about firefighting, which is a key part of the operational side of it. But as we know, there's an awful lot of other stuff, not just the firefighting. It's rescue, when it's road accidents or flooding stuff, as well as stuff overseas. But I think, is it worth saying that there's the non-operational roles? I mean, project managers, IT specialists. So are these all roles which you're looking for as well, in addition to just people being firefighters? Shay,
sorry, Alistair. Yeah, sorry.
Or Shay,
yes, definitely. It's so as JP alluded to, there are green book or support staff who work in all fire and rescue service organisations across the UK, and they are as vital and important and integral as the operational guys and girls are, because without them, the fire and rescue service literally wouldn't function. So we have roles from all walks of life. So we have, project managers, HR, payroll, logistics, resourcing, supports, governance. There's a whole health and safety. There's a whole range of people that we employ that keep the fire service, keep it on track, keep it moving through innovation and creativity. And a lot of people from the armed forces who worked in logistics, who work in the HR world, in the payroll world, there is also that transferable skill as well into the UK Fire and Rescue Service, especially Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service. We also look at people who from all sorts of walks of life, and obviously disabilities. Just because you have a disability doesn't mean you can't work for the Fire and Rescue Service. So we are really sort of pushing on that at the moment with ourselves, and we are committed within UK Fire and Rescue, as every Fire and Rescue Service is, to that equality, diversity, inclusion piece. And we in Berkshire are disability confident leads and support people with disabilities or even long-term health conditions throughout the application process and through their time in the service. So we take people from all walks of life, especially in the support services, who can still contribute to providing that service to the community, not just the operational front face, if you like, of all our fantastic firefighters going out and doing their job day to day and rescuing lives. Behind them sits another mass of people who, from all walks of life and all backgrounds, who can really do support and help and push that through.
I mean, it's a key point. And I know that a month or so ago, we had a session like this about the NHS. And of course, a lot of people think the NHS is about doctors and nurses. I mean, to put it sounds sort of simplistically. And clearly they got key roles. But my goodness me, there are a huge amount of different roles. And so it seems to be now that the fire services has got, there is a perception. It is, clearly it's the frontline element, which is the delivery, operational stuff. But my goodness me, there's a lot of other opportunities for people who don't necessarily, they might not be attracted to be, a firefighter, but are clearly able to support. I mean, presumably there are roles for maintenance and maintaining kit and some engineering type roles. And what are the opportunities for, I'll say, overseas travel? It sounds a bit trite. But I mean, you do read in the papers a lot are selected to go and do disaster relief in countries. Does that still happen, JP? I mean,
yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, just going back to the sort of maintenance roles, we have what we call fireground assistants within Manchester who aren't operational firefighters, although many have gone from that role into operational firefighting, and they help set up scenarios for assessments, for training, and all that sort of good stuff. But they also maintain a lot of the equipment as well behind the scenes, and also a lot of the estates as well. Although we do have a separate department for estates alone as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different roles available. With regards to the overseas sort of urban rescue stuff, it really does go on. Yeah, there are national teams and there are international team, or a national team, international team. So anything that goes on around the world, whether it be earthquake, whether it be major flood, major famine, even the list is probably exhaustive. There is a team that would be flown out to anywhere in the world to help out with a multitude of skills, and that is available to anybody to try and. There is a selection process, however, it is open to anybody who wants to have a go at that and get involved. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, it's definitely worth saying. I mean, I think people. We mentioned earlier on about values and ethos of people who are serving and how they relate, but many people want to do good, and actually having that extra thing. Obviously, the main role is doing a hugely vital piece of service in the community. But actually, the extra thing is, it can also help people in very difficult, dire straits around the world as well. And we've seen it in, whether it's, as you say, earthquakes or fire and flood or natural disasters, let's say. So it's a major thing. So I think it's a very interesting. Kate, when you sort of, from your perspective, when you're talking to the veterans, some of them don't have much of an idea where they want to go. How do you see it now, hearing all the stuff about the opportunities which exist in the fire service? How do you sort of see them? Would you sort of tee them up, identify some people, say, you'll be naturally suited to this area?
Absolutely. I mean, just a little bit there that you were saying about the maintainer roles. You think about the junior stokers perhaps on board who top up the AFFFs and charge the hoses and know how to connect those hoses and discharge them. You don't get that training in Civvy Street. I know I keep harping on about that, but you just don't. And, they could quite easily step into a grounds maintenance role within a fire station. And then, it's part of that team again. And then I was going to ask JP, if I may, about the progression routes. Let's say that you did start, and you mentioned there about starting as on the ground and then progressing as a firefighter. What other roles can you progress into during your career?
So, there's loads of roles, loads of departments, but the conventional route, I suppose, through the ranks would be you do your apprenticeship firefighter term of ours is currently 24 months. You would then be eligible to go for promotion, if you like, to crew manager. Crew manager will be in charge of a second pump or a very small incident. And then you could progress to watch manager, which obviously is slightly bigger, 2 pump incidents. Then you get the chance to go to station manager, group manager, area manager, and then the senior ranks. But within that, it's not just a straight line up the ranks. There are sort of branches off there. So you could go into fire safety, you could go into fire investigation, you could go into training, which myself and Ché are both in at the moment. You could go into operational intelligence, for example. You could go into flying a drone. There are so many different roles within the fire service at a lot of different ranks. It's nearly impossible to get bored, and it really does offer a lot of opportunities to people.
Thank you. No, that's really good. And the way that I can sell that to veterans actually, or service leavers, is it's like having a task book. You need to complete your task books and complete those tasks on the ground to be able to move up. And I think that model really does replicate and attract service personnel. And the fact that you're talking about all those secondary roles and ancillary roles, the instruction that we do, the leadership skills. But when you think about, take a soldier, for example, who does a guard duty, their first point of contact, they know how to talk to the public. when we've done our disaster relief or our firefighting or our first aid training, you're dealing with members of the public. And again, you've got to be able to communicate and have those communication skills. So it's all of that I try and draw out of the veterans to be able to showcase what's available.
It's such a key thing, and in fact, touched on an interesting thing there, Kate, as you say. I mean, dealing with the public. I mean, and I think you mentioned, JP, just there is something about the I suppose the sort of campaigns, education of the public into fire safety or all these things, electrical safety. And I remember, gosh, years ago, seeing something when I grew up at home. Some of these things. So there are quite a few fairs and training and stuff like that. Not just internal training. This is actually going out to the community, and that's quite a large part of this, is it?
It absolutely is. I would say the average fire appliance in Greater Manchester will go out into the community probably once a day to do some sort of interaction, whether it is putting smoke alarms up, which is a large part of it, to giving demonstrations, to giving input to schools, to giving fire safety advice to businesses. There is a lot of communication, a lot of interaction between ourselves and the general public. And as Kate said before, and I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush by any means, but although I've just said but, which probably means I am, the generation that comes through now who tend to be very tech savvy, there isn't a lot, or there can be parts where their communication skills fall down slightly compared to someone who has that ability because of their experiences either in training exercises or in far fields across the world. I totally understand that, Kate, and I think it's a massively valid point.
It was interesting about the technology, but I mean, I know that some of it is pretty robust stuff in it. But I mean, I remember certainly when I was serving in the Navy that thermal imaging cameras, which came in at one stage. So a Type 42 destroyer, there's a bit of a dit on here actually, would have 3 of these on the ship. So 1 forward, 1 aft, and 1 in midships, I suppose. And these were, I don't know how much their cost was, but of course it's pretty high tech, and I'm sure the ones then were pretty antiquated compared to the sort of technology you've got now. To sort of find going to find people in buildings full of smoke, etc. So I'm sure there's an awful lot more high tech stuff in the industry now as well, isn't there?
It's ever growing, really. The advances in firefighting itself and the firefighting equipment, even from when myself and Ché joined 20 years ago, has been massive. For example, we're using ultra high pressure Lance at the moment in Manchester, and I don't know if that's nationwide, but that's a massive advancement. You talk about thermal imagery. We carry that on every single fire appliance. We use it in training, and we've also got a drone that can use IR or thermal imagery as well. So the advancements are huge, and there are skills that do transfer across from that as well. So it's like Shay said before, we do need that variety of person to make sure that we are a fully rounded fire service. Massive advancements.
Yeah, and it is key. I mean, I think we touched on it. I mean, the sort of people who do leave. I mean, and this natural affinity with the work, and I think comes. I mean, I know, and I would say, I mean, I spent a lot of time with the Army and the Air Force, but served in the Royal Navy. I mean, yes, I mean, most people probably will know every member of the ship's company is fire trained. I mean, you do it was a week's course of firefighting, and some of the exercise fires it were pretty big and pretty major, oil fires, that sort of stuff, because it's pretty essential that everyone has got to be able to pick up an extinguisher or stick a Fear Not suit on and go into a smoke-filled compartment and do the business. And so I suppose that's, and I know lots of areas of the Royal Air Force and the Army also have people where they are specially trained for it. But it's just that strong affinity with the work and which, as I say, which draws the attributes of people anyway. No, it's very good. I mean, actually, Shay, why? I mean, when you left the RAF, I know we mentioned earlier on about your own transition, but what was it that attracted you into this?
So what attracted me to the fire service was a friend of mine who I worked when I came out of the Air Force, went and did some sort of specialist security work before I joined, and he was in the fire service, and we were just chatting away, talking. We were out on the hills one day, just walking, and we were talking away about his role in the fire service, and I just found myself thinking, well, I can do that. Well, I can do that. I do that already. In my mind, I'm walking along, I'm ticking along. Well, why can't I be doing this? Because all these things we're talking about, I know I can do. So that sort of got me into it. And also it is the fact of the team ethos, the teamwork, the watches, as we call them, the shifts you work in across 4 color watches, blue, red, white, and green. Blue, red, and white for obvious reasons, but the green watch, funny enough, came in back in the 70s, I think, when they said we didn't have enough firefighters. They made a new watch back in the 70s. Green watch came about. So you think now 30 years on or so from that, hence why we're going through this sort of big recruitment phase, because all those guys and girls who joined all those years ago are all now sort of going. So, but yes, that was what attracted me. It was the fact that it was very similar to what I was working. I was used to working in a team, highly stressful, dynamic, inclusive sort of team effort. Because don't forget, in the armed forces, you know, they recruit from the whole of the Commonwealth. So you have diverse people from, you know, all sorts of different country, different backgrounds and cultures. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the armed forces as they are now are one of the sort of leading sort of diversity, sort of rich employees out there. And of course, we as the Fire and Rescue Service really sort of embrace that sort of diversity of course the people we employ. So again, it's that sort of that pool of people who hit all our skills and attributes we're looking for in people. And there is no stereotypical firefighter anymore. You know, the old days of, I think if I'm right, way back, you had to have a certain height. You had to be able to extend your chest a certain couple of inches, you know. Those days are long gone. We've got people from all walks of life, you know, all shapes, sizes, cultural backgrounds, beliefs, who really just want to serve their community. And therein lies that other transition from the armed forces into the Fire and Rescue Service, really.
I mean, all this talk is really want to make me get into, you know, finals. I'm missing my experiences. I mean, and sometimes, I mean, yes, I mean, we talked about, we experienced actually putting out fires and stuff. I mean, you know, for exercise, I was in a ship, HMS Glasgow once, when we had a very, very bad fire just off the northern bit in the Mediterranean, just off Genoa. And at night we were replenishing at sea. It shows what can happen. Off a big tanker which is shoving fuel across, and I was the navigator on the bridge room, and it was getting dark. It was pretty dark, and I remember we just heard this sort of machinery breakdown sound, and I looked up and I just saw this. I thought it was a big black cloud. Realised it was smoke coming out of the funnel, and then fire, all that sort of stuff, and it was a massive fire. Basically, they'd carried on pumping the oil through, which went over the spill things onto a boiling hot generator, and the whole thing kicked off, flash fire and everything. 2 stokers down there, they got out okay, shut the compartment down, CO2 drenched twice, ship had emergency stations for about 3 hours, and then the temperatures are going up, and then finally a team went in at the top, five-man team with 2 hoses each, and put the sort of stuff out, and amazing. So anyway, and then we limped into Genoa the next day. But, you know, these things happen. And I think, you know, that was an experience. I mean, I was navigating the ship at the time, and close quarters with another ship. So it's quite lively. And but I mean, I think a lot of people in the armed forces have got similar experiences. And I think this is brilliant to hear this. So it's making me miss it all now. I wish I'd come back. I need to go up to Manchester and to Reading to have more of a chat.
And of course, it's not just fire, is it, Alistair? I mean, there's the flood aspect as well, which we haven't discussed. And like you were saying earlier, Shay, offline, you know, disaster relief, wildfires, floods. There's so much more. It's not just about the fires, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, like JP touched, there's so many different specialist roles now in the fire service, both operationally and both in support services. You know, in the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, we talk about prevention, protection, and response. So there's 3 strands to what we do here, and that touches across both operational and support service staff, who are all pushing that same agenda to make sure that, you know, the communities we serve are as safe as they can be. So, but that sort of does tie back into armed forces, because you looked after each other in those armed forces. You had a pride and a respect for who you served, and you wore that being, if you look on JP's shirt, you know, the badge you wear with pride. And firefighters across the whole UK, when they pass out of training, they get their shirt and their, you know, and anybody will say, you know, they're very proud of what they've earned, and it's that there is that reflection back into the armed forces, where whichever regiment, corps, squadron you've worked with and worked for, you do have that pride, loyalty for them. And so that does translate. Again, it's another translation into the modern UK Fire and Rescue Service, that they still hold that to such a high standard and high regard, really.
Amazing. No, it's tremendous. So I think it'd be quite good to sort of capture. I mean, many people will be watching this and thinking, I'm very interested. How would we sum up sort of the top tips to say, you know, if someone's thinking, JP, would be your top tips of somebody there, a service leaver coming out, thinking of joining? What would you say?
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 sort of top tips, really. I would say the first one is a big one, is do your research on the service that you're thinking of joining. From my point of view, Greater Manchester will differ from Royal Berkshire, and that will be the same throughout the nation. So do some research on the one that you're aiming to join. If you are able to, or they're allowing you to, especially in these crazy times at the moment, go down to a fire station and talk to the personnel on duty. They will welcome you in, no doubt about it. They will take you to the mess room and have a brew with you, get all your questions out and ask them to have a look around a pump, get some hands on some couplings, for example, which is what a technical term for stuff that we put together with. It's basically a fixing, but have a look at some of the couplings that we have, some of the equipment, so you can go to an interview and actually back up some statements that you're making with a little bit of prior knowledge. I would also say keep your fitness up. We have way too many people come to our national firefighter selection tests who have decided to neglect the fitness. And again, I think it's slightly different throughout Britain, but we go to level 8.8, which isn't massively high. However, you do need to train to achieve that. So please, if you are thinking of it, do not, I'll use the phrase, chin off your fizz. Do not do that. And I would talk to serving personnel, anyone you know that is serving, and a lot of people do know people who are serving, and that's one of the reasons why they're thinking of getting into it. Talk to them, go into it with your eyes wide open, know exactly what you're wanting out of it, what they want out of you. And then I touched on it briefly before with the NFCC framework. If you get to that stage, have a little study of the NFCC framework. And if you take anything from what I'm saying, which I know I've got a very drony Yorkshire voice, have a look at the NFCC framework, because a lot of people's interview questions now are based from that. Those would be my top tips.
Excellent advice there, JP. Thank you very much indeed. And what would you say, Shay?
So he's always done all the best bits already. So for me, it's again, be open, be honest, ask yourself why you're wanting to join the fire service. Have that conversation with yourself. And top tip for interviews, I would say, sit in front of a mirror and talk about yourself. And that sounds crazy, but it does work, because it gets you used to sitting in that interview process, if you get that far, to how you talk about your life experiences. And a lot of the fire services now, yes, they want to know about what you know about the service. Obviously, you're joining, so they want to know you've done your research and you're committed to serving that community. But it's also about what your thoughts and your feelings are around behavioural markers and your behavioural sort of framework, as you like. So we're in Berkshire, the behavioural competency framework, which is taken from the NFCC, and basically we look at how you lead yourself, how you lead others, how you hold yourself, what ideals do you hold yourself, your moral compass, if you like. How is that held? What's your views on equality and diversity, inclusion in the fire service? How do you see that working? And then down to, what do you think the day of a firefighter looks like, you know? And for what JP says, if you've done your homework, you've gone to the local station, and I would reiterate, I know of nobody in the fire service, if somebody turned up on the doorstep and knocked the door, say, please, can I come in and have a chat about joining the fire service? Nobody would ever turn anybody away, ever. So, you know, and they're happy to join you. They're happy to welcome you in with open arms. They'll answer all your questions to the best of their abilities. If they don't know something, they'll signpost to someone, so other senior ranks that they're on the day, people like myself or JP around the station, happily talk to people. This isn't a closed sort of secret society sort of phase. You knock on the door and ask, people will tell you what you want to know. But I'd say those probably some of my top tips, and obviously probably keep your fitness up for the selection tests. But for me, those would be my top tips, I think.
That's brilliant. And actually, thanks, Anna, as well. That's a really lovely thing. Was in the army and now down in Devon in Somerset. 4 on, 4 off. Great stuff. Based in Exeter. Happy to chat to anyone. I mean, that's on LinkedIn. So that's a really good call. But very useful. And actually, it's interesting that we don't normally have, when people say about top tips, fitness, but clearly it is a key thing. And we absolutely take that. It is a key thing. So, Kate, what would your answer to be? What are your top tips then?
Well, other than what Shay and JP have already covered, I think definitely do your research, absolutely. But part of that is, get yourself within the community. This is a community service. So the more that you can do to help bolster that community aim, whether that's volunteering at the fire station or becoming a retained firefighter to start with, all of that is going to help your experience and bolster your own skill set to then become a full-time firefighter. They often have local open days, car washing, that type of thing. So get involved with that as much as you can and start marketing yourself. I think it's very hard to market yourself when you leave the services. And that would be my biggest thing, is to get yourself seen, do the research, and then work on yourself and what you can bring to the service.
That's brilliant. I mean, I've got a couple of things as well. Actually, and actually, there's some great hubs as well, aren't there? Some veterans hubs. I mean, Shay, are you running some veterans hubs in your area?
Yes, so the Royal Berkshire Rescue Service, we run the Armed Forces Hub Initiative, whereby we've just started back on the back end of COVID, open up our fire stations within the communities to access for veterans, communities, shared organisations, to use that as a safe space for them to run events for veterans to come in, have a cup of tea, chat to the firefighters on station, have a bacon butty, have a chat. Organisations can come in and talk to them and signpost them towards any sort of mental health issues or any sort of homing issues or anything that anyone from the veterans sort of community are sort of need some help and support with, or even just for them to come in and just chat to people from that walk of life that they used to work and be around those people again, especially for a lot of veterans who have been sort of alone through the COVID pandemic. And we also work with CTP. We run the Insight Days, which is basically where we invite service leavers from CTP that are identified who are from the local area, who come into a physical sort of meeting with ourselves, local police and ambulance services. And we all run sort of like a job fair day, if you like, for the emergency services. So we all sort of get up on stage and sort of talk about our services and how great we are and how much better the fire service is and the police and the ambulance. And then obviously we talk about what our roles we got, operational and our support services roles. And then outside of that, they come out into the yard, and out in the yard is a whole breadth of police, ambulance and fire appliances, staffed by people from those three services who are all veterans or serving reservists. So there is that sort of language sort of barrier, and they all can sort of relate, and that breaks down some barriers quite quickly, and it leads to some good recruitment opportunities for service leavers. So those are sort of the two main sort of things we run in Berkshire, really.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity there, and a great facility, isn't it, to particularly help veterans making this sort of transition. I mean, for me, so top tips. I mean, actually, yes, so we covered. Perhaps summarising a bit, I think the first thing it is for anyone out there who's interested, and whether you're a veteran or you are a service leaver, the research bit is important. Just look into the thing. There's a lot of stuff online. I mean, we're putting up some links, etc. here anyway. So do that. And it's a great point that JP makes. There are different variations across the country, the sort of nature of the work. So I think that is absolutely a key thing. The second thing I would say is about confidence. And this is a more general point, that people who served, you've got fantastic skills, and never think you can go into an interview thinking you're going to be, disadvantaged or whatever. Particularly in the fire in this sector, because we've got a great group of people there who are actively seeking people with a military background and know that there's an ethos fit that people's experiences. So it's welcoming with open arms type thing, and that's not always the case with some employers who don't quite understand what attributes service leavers bring. So I think that's the thing. So have the confidence that you've got all these extra skills. And the third thing, really, and again, it's what Shay mentioned. If you're going through transition, do run through the CTP program. And there are some great courses and great skills and workshops and career advice, which happens from the CTP staff, and there are also careers fairs, etc. And if you're a veteran, well, go into the RFEA website. I mean, remember, RFEA supports service leavers, veterans outside the CTP space, right the way through their working lives. So there's a lot of support, and that's exactly the role that Kate does so brilliantly down in the Southwest. And so anyone who's elsewhere around the country, we've got people who can support. So it is a really tremendous sector, one which has recruited successfully people for the armed forces in the past. I'm sure it will carry on in the future. But if people are interested, do go on these links, do look at it. And there's a lot of exciting opportunities in there. So we're coming towards the end of our session. So hopefully those, have any more questions externally? I mean, any more feedback if anyone wants to raise anything. But before I sort of summarize what we're doing, is there any other thoughts from our panel about what we've been talking about, or anything which we think we need to cover or mention it anymore?
I'll just step in there, Alistair, just for a couple of seconds, really. And it was just something you mentioned there about veterans. If you've left X amount of years, if you are in the Northwest or in Manchester in particular, please still get in touch with the Joiners team, which was on the website on the link before. We would still be very interested. And on a side note to that, we don't have an age limit anymore. So whether you've been gone 20 years and you're in the twilight of your, or you think you're in the twilight of years, please get in touch and let's see if you really are or not, because you still have skills that we're probably after. Thank you.
It's a great point, JP, and it's lovely to hear you make that. I mean, and as we say to many people, I mean, people's overall transition. In fact, there's just been a recent study by the Forces in Mind Trust about veterans. There's loads of people study, transition, people leaving. This is the first one which is actually beyond that, sort of 2 to 10 years out. And it's quite clear that people's experiences, having served, quite often go into jobs straight away, do a couple of years, and then want to move on. So it's not just about that transition period up to about 2 years after they leave. It is what happens afterwards as well. So I'm absolutely sure there'll be many people out there who've started a different career. It's not quite for them. And then looking, and if they're listening to this, might think, actually, from what I've heard today, do you know what? I'd really like to fancy this. So then do get in touch. And JP, that's a great call. And same with Shay as well. So I think it's a tremendous thing. So I think we'll, no more other questions I think have come from outside yet. So I just think, where do we sit? Well, gosh, as I say, it's a tremendous sector with a good track record, dare I say, of recruiting and supporting veterans. There are so many things which we've covered. Clearly, ethos, the values fit, which just mirrors exactly people's service in the armed forces of whatever service. There's also, particularly some areas in the armed forces who've actually done the direct training already, so they've got the direct skills. But it's not just about the key roles of firefighting or rescue, etc. There are also some tremendous opportunities more widely in these other specialist sectors: IT, HR, whatever, cyber, and project management, and all of those sort of things we were talking about earlier on. So there's a whole wealth of things. So please, if you are interested, and I'm sure many of you will be, do get in touch with the links which we've been pushing up. But anyway, I think that was a tremendous session. Hopefully, it was useful to everybody. And even do carry on submitting comments even after we finished. But hopefully that was of use. And I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed to the panel, to JP, to Shay, to Kate for giving up your time. I know actually JP and Shay, it's a busy Friday afternoon, and there could well be things which are going to be called away shortly to do, and Kate as well. And but anyway, it's a busy time. But and hopefully everyone has enjoyed that. And thank you, everyone who is tuned in this Friday afternoon. And hope that was useful. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you very much indeed. And bye-bye.